Ilara had delivered hundreds of babies in her 23 years as a midwife. She had never expected to deliver one that would change everything. The summons came at midnight, delivered by soldiers who didn't knock. They simply broke down her door. She was dragged from her small cottage on the edge of the village, still wearing her threadbare nightgown, her medical bag clutched against her chest like a shield. "The Queen is in labor," one soldier grunted. "You'll attend her." Ilara's blood turned to ice. Everyone knew the Lycan Queen had been laboring for 2 days. Everyone knew the royal physicians had fled when the king's rage became too dangerous to survive. And everyone knew that the last midwife summoned to the castle had been carried out in pieces. She was not chosen because she was skilled. She was chosen because she was expendable. The poor midwife from the village. No family. No connections. No one to mourn her if she failed. The castle loomed against the storm-dark sky, its towers piercing the clouds like black fangs. Ilara had never been inside. Common folk weren't permitted past the outer walls. Now she was being half-carried, half-dragged through corridors that smelled of blood and fear. Servants pressed themselves against walls as she passed. Their eyes held pity and resignation. "They think I'm already dead." The doors to the Queen's chambers stood 20 feet tall, carved with wolves mid-hunt. 2 guards flanked them, their faces pale beneath their helmets. "She won't survive," one whispered to the other. "Neither of them will." Ilara's hands trembled as the doors swung open. The chamber was chaos. Bloodied linens everywhere, shattered glass from thrown objects. And at the center of it all, on a bed that could fit 10 people, lay the Queen. Beautiful even in her agony, her silver hair plastered to her face with sweat, her screams hoarse from 2 days of labor. But Ilara barely registered the Queen. Her attention was caught, held, consumed by the figure standing at the foot of the bed, the Lycan King. She had heard stories. Everyone had. Tales of a monster who had ruled for 300 years, who had torn his enemies apart with his bare hands, whose very presence made grown men weep with terror. She had imagined something grotesque, something barely human. She had not imagined him. He was enormous, nearly 7 feet of solid muscle that strained against his blood-stained shirt. His hair was black as midnight, falling past his shoulders in tangled waves. His face was all sharp angles and brutal beauty, the kind of face that belonged on ancient warriors and conquering kings. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. Golden, burning, wild with a grief so profound it made her chest ache. Those eyes fixed on her. "You." His voice was a growl, rough and raw from what might have been screaming or snarling or both. "You're the midwife." It wasn't a question. Ilara forced herself to nod. "Save them." He moved toward her, and every instinct she possessed screamed to run. He stopped inches away, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, see the barely contained wolf lurking beneath his skin. "Save my mate and my son, and I will give you anything. Anything. Fail." His voice cracked. "Don't fail." Not a threat. A plea. Ilara had attended births for nobles who viewed her as little more than furniture. She had been cursed, blamed, dismissed. Never once had anyone looked at her the way this ancient, terrifying king was looking at her now, like she was the only hope left in his world. "I need space," she heard herself say. "Everyone out except 2 servants to assist me. And I need him." She gestured at the king. "To stay calm. His energy is affecting her. She can feel his panic." The room went silent. No one spoke to the Lycan King that way. No one told him what to do. Ilara waited for the blow, the roar, the claws. Instead, the king stepped back. His massive hands were shaking. "Tell me where to stand." Something shifted in Ilara's chest. Something small and foolish and entirely inappropriate for the moment. She pushed it aside and got to work. The next 6 hours were the hardest of her life. The queen's labour had stalled, the baby positioned wrong, and Ilara had to use every technique she knew. Some passed down from her grandmother, some she'd discovered herself through years of desperate improvisation. Through it all, the king stayed exactly where she'd placed him, by the queen's head, holding her hand, whispering words in the old language that Ilara didn't understand, but the queen seemed to find soothing. He never took his eyes off Ilara, not with suspicion, not with the casual dismissal she'd received from every noble she'd ever served. With focus, as if she were commanding an army and he was her most devoted soldier. When the sun rose, painting the chamber in gold and pink, a baby's cry split the air. A prince, healthy, perfect, screaming his outrage at the indignity of being born. Ilara placed him on the queen's chest, her own eyes burning with exhausted tears. She had done it. Against all odds, she had. The bleeding won't stop. The queen's whisper was so soft, Ilara almost missed it. She looked down and felt her heart seize. Too much blood. Far too much. No. The king's voice was barely human. No, no, no. Ilara was already moving, already pressing, already fighting. But she knew. She knew. She had seen this before, had lost mothers to it before. There was nothing. Save her. The king grabbed Ilara's shoulders, his grip bruising. You saved my son. Save her. Please. I'm trying, Ilara gasped. I'm trying, but the bleeding, I can't. Caspian. The queen's voice was serene now, eerily calm. My love, let her go. The king released Ilara as if burned. He fell to his knees beside the bed, gathering his mate in his arms, his whole body shaking with silent sobs. Don't leave me. Please. I can't. Alessia. Please. Watch over him. The queen touched his face, leaving a bloody handprint on his cheek. Our son. And the girl. Her eyes found Ilara. The girl who saved him. Keep her safe. Alessia. Promise me. I promise. I promise. Just don't go. Don't leave me. But she was already gone. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Ilara had ever heard. Then the king threw his head back and howled. The sound shattered every window in the chamber. It echoed through the castle, through the grounds, across the kingdom itself. A grief so vast it could swallow worlds. Ilara stood frozen, covered in blood that wasn't her own, holding a crying prince in her arms because someone had to, and no one else was capable. When the howl finally faded, the king turned to look at her. His eyes were no longer golden. They were pure silver, the eyes of a wolf barely contained in human skin. His grief had sharpened into something dangerous, something that needed an outlet. This is it, Ilara thought. He'll kill me now, blame me for her death. You. His voice was gravel and broken glass. The child. Bring him here. Ilara's legs moved without her permission. She approached the king slowly, carefully, the way one might approach a wounded predator. When she was close enough, she held out the crying prince. The king took his son with a gentleness that seemed impossible from hands that could crush stone. The baby quieted instantly, recognizing his father's scent. Then the king looked at Ilara again. You will stay, he said. It wasn't a request. Your Majesty, the Queen's last words were to keep you safe. His silver eyes burned into hers. My mate, my fated. Her final breath was spent on you. Do you understand what that means? Ilara shook her head, mute with exhaustion and fear. It means you're mine now. His voice dropped to a growl that vibrated through her bones. Under my protection, under my watch, you will stay in this castle and no one will touch you. He rose to his full height, his son cradled against his chest, his devastated face hardening into something that looked like a promise. Anyone who tries will die. Ilara stared at the Lycan king, this ancient, grief-shattered creature who had just lost his mate and somehow, impossibly, had claimed her in the same breath. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Something warm and confusing and entirely unwelcome. What have I gotten myself into? 3 days passed before Ilara saw the king again. She had been given chambers that were larger than her entire cottage. A 4-poster bed draped in velvet. A fireplace tall enough to stand in. Windows that overlooked gardens she had only ever glimpsed from outside the castle walls. It felt like a gilded cage. Servants came and went, bringing food she couldn't taste and dresses she didn't deserve. They were polite, but distant, their eyes sliding away from hers whenever she tried to speak with them. She was an anomaly, a village midwife living in the royal wing. They didn't know what to make of her. Neither did she. On the 3rd night, unable to sleep, Ilara wandered the corridors. She knew she shouldn't. She had been told to stay in her rooms, but the walls were closing in, and her mind kept replaying the Queen's death, the King's howl, the impossible words he had spoken. You're mine now. What did that even mean? She found herself in the nursery without meaning to. The door was ajar, soft candlelight spilling into the hallway. She peered inside. The king sat in a rocking chair, his massive frame absurdly large for the delicate furniture. The prince, she had learned his name was Alaric, was cradled against his chest, fast asleep. The king's eyes were closed, but Ilara knew he wasn't sleeping. His breathing was too controlled, too deliberate. She should leave. She should turn around and, "You can come in." His voice was quieter than before, stripped of the raw grief that had made it so terrifying. Now it just sounded tired. Ilara hesitated. Then she stepped inside. The nursery was warm, the fire crackling softly. Toys and blankets were scattered about. Gifts from nobles across the kingdom, she assumed. But the king seemed to have no use for any of it. He held his son like he was the only anchor keeping him from drowning. "You haven't been eating." Ilara blinked. "How do you?" "The servants report to me." He opened his eyes. They were golden again, though dimmer than before, exhausted. "You've barely touched your meals. You don't sleep. You pace your room until dawn." Heat crept up her neck. "I didn't realize I was being watched." "You're under my protection. Of course you're being watched." He said it without apology, without aggression, simply a fact. "Sit." There was another chair near the fire, smaller and clearly meant for a nursemaid. Ilara lowered herself into it, acutely aware of how close she was to him now, close enough to see the dark circles beneath his eyes, the way his jaw was shadowed with days of unshaved stubble. He looked less like a monster and more like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "Why am I here?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Truly, I'm nobody. A village midwife. The Queen—" She faltered. "The Queen didn't know me." Why would she spend her last breath on a stranger? The king was silent for a long moment. His thumb traced slow circles on his son's back. Alessia had the sight, he said finally. Visions, glimpses of what might be. She saw you before you ever arrived. He looked at Ilara, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. She told me, the night before Alaric came, that a woman would save our son. A woman with gentle hands and a stubborn heart. She said, his voice roughened. She said this woman would be important, that I should keep her close. Ilara's throat tightened. Important how? She didn't say. The visions never give everything. A ghost of a smile crossed his face, there and gone. It used to drive me mad. She would tell me fragments, riddles, and then laugh when I demanded more. It was the first time he had spoken of the Queen without that edge of shattered grief. There was still pain. There would always be pain. But beneath it, Ilara glimpsed something softer. Love. The kind that didn't die just because one person did. I'm sorry, she whispered. For your loss. I tried everything I knew, but the bleeding... You saved my son. The king cut her off, but gently. You came into this castle expecting to die, and you saved him anyway. Do you think I don't know what courage that took? He shook his head slowly. I have lived for 300 years. I have seen countless people in impossible situations. Most of them crumble. You didn't. Ilara didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Like she mattered. Like her actions meant something beyond the immediate moment. The servants are afraid of me, she said instead. It wasn't what she meant to say, but it was easier than acknowledging his words. They're afraid of what you represent. Change. The king shifted Alaric carefully, settling him more securely. A commoner in the royal wing, a human who held the prince before any noble did. They don't know where you fit. Neither do I. Then let me clarify. He leaned forward, and despite the sleeping baby in his arms, despite the exhaustion in his face, his presence filled the room. You are under my protection. That means no one touches you, no one harms you, no one so much as speaks to you with disrespect. Anyone who violates this will answer to me personally. But why? Ilara pressed. The Queen's vision. That can't be the only reason. You're the Lycan king. You don't owe anything to a dying woman's cryptic words. Something flickered in his golden eyes. No, I don't. Then why? He studied her for a long moment. The fire crackled. Alaric made a soft sound in his sleep. Because when my mate was dying, the king said slowly, and I was losing my mind to grief, you were the only person in that room who wasn't afraid to tell me what to do. You looked at me, a monster who has slaughtered armies, who has made kingdoms tremble, and you told me to stand in the corner and stay calm. Ilara felt her face flush. I didn't mean... You meant every word, and I listened. His voice dropped lower. Do you know how long it's been since someone spoke to me like I was just a man? Not a king, not a weapon, just a man who needed to be told where to stand so he wouldn't make things worse. The silence stretched between them, heavy with something Ilara couldn't name. You saw me, he continued quietly. In that moment, when I was at my worst, you saw me. Not the crown, not the power, not the beast. He looked down at his son, then back at her. That is why you're here? That is why you'll stay? Ilara's heart was beating too fast. This was dangerous. This feeling unfurling in her chest, warm and terrifying and entirely unwelcome. He was grieving. He was her king. He was 3 centuries old, and she was a nobody from a village that didn't even appear on most maps. But when he looked at her like that, like she was something rare, something worth keeping, she forgot all the reasons this was impossible. "I don't know how to be whatever you need me to be," she admitted. "I'm just a midwife." The king's lips curved. Not quite a smile, but close. The first hint of light in all that darkness. "Then be a midwife. Alaric will need someone who knows how to care for infants. The noble nurses are more concerned with protocol than with actually helping him." He stood, moving with surprising grace for someone so large. "Stay because you want to, not because I've commanded it. I won't force you." He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. "But Elara—" He glanced back at her, and his eyes held something that made her pulse stutter. "I hope you stay." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the dying fire and the echo of her name on his lips. He knew her name. The Lycan king knew her name. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart race beneath her palm. What have I gotten myself into? Elara stayed. She told herself it was for Alaric, the tiny prince with his father's dark hair and his mother's silver eyes. He was fussy with the noble nurses, screaming until his face turned red, refusing to settle. But with Elara, he calmed. He would curl his small fingers around hers and sleep for hours. "You have a gift," one of the older servants remarked, watching Elara rock the prince by the nursery window. "He knows you saved him." Elara didn't believe in such things. Babies didn't remember their births. But she couldn't deny that Alaric seemed to recognize her somehow, that he turned toward her voice, that his crying stopped the moment she lifted him into her arms. It felt like purpose, like belonging. She tried not to think about the other reason she stayed. The king visited the nursery every night. Sometimes he spoke to her. Sometimes he simply sat in the rocking chair, holding his son, watching Elara with those golden eyes that seemed to see straight through her. She learned to read his moods. The tight jaw that meant council meetings had gone poorly. The softened gaze that meant he was thinking of his late wife. The slight curve of his lips that meant Alaric had done something to amuse him. She was learning him, and that terrified her more than anything. 2 weeks after her arrival, Elara woke to screaming. Not Alaric. The sound was deeper, rawer, a howl of anguish that shook the walls. She was out of bed before she fully registered moving, her bare feet slapping against cold stone as she ran toward the sound. The king's chambers. The guards at the door looked stricken. One of them reached out as if to stop her. "Don't," Elara said, and something in her voice made him drop his hand. She pushed open the door. The room was destroyed. Furniture overturned. Curtains shredded. Deep gouges in the stone walls where claws had raked through. And in the center of it all, the king, half shifted, caught between man and wolf, his body contorted with a grief that had finally broken free. He was having a nightmare, or a memory, or both. Alessia. Her name tore from his throat. Alessia. Elara should have been afraid. He could kill her without meaning to. One swipe of those claws, one snap of those elongated jaws. The guards hadn't followed her inside. No one would save her if this went wrong. She walked toward him anyway. "Your Majesty." Her voice was calm, steady, the same voice she used with laboring mothers when panic threatened to overwhelm them. Caspian. His name felt strange on her tongue, too intimate. But it worked. The king's wild eyes found hers. For a moment, he didn't seem to recognize her. His chest heaved, his claws flexed. It's Ilara. She stopped an arm's length away, close enough to touch, close enough to die. You're dreaming? You need to wake up. She's gone. His voice was barely human. I felt her die. I felt the bond break. A shudder ran through him. It's still breaking. Every night. Over and over. Ilara's heart cracked. She had lost patients before, had grieved for them, carried the weight of their deaths. But she had never felt a bond shatter, had never experienced the severing of two souls that had been joined for centuries. I know, she said softly. I know it hurts. You don't know. It wasn't an accusation, just exhaustion. You can't. No, I can't. She took another step closer. But I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Something shifted in his face. The wolf receded slowly, claws retracting, bones settling back into human form. He stood before her, just a man now, broken and grieving and so utterly alone that it made her ache. Why? His voice was hoarse. Why do you keep walking toward the monster instead of running away? Because you're not a monster. Ilara reached out before she could stop herself. Her fingers brushed his cheek, the same cheek where Alessia had left her bloody handprint. You're a man who lost everything and is still standing. That's not monstrous. That's brave. The king closed his eyes. A single tear tracked down his face, catching on her fingertips. I don't feel brave. The confession was barely a whisper. I feel like I'm drowning. Every moment of every day. The only time I can breathe is... He stopped. Is what? He opened his eyes. The gold was molten now, burning with something that made her pulse race. When I'm with you. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Ilara knew she should step back, should remind him that she was nobody, that he was grieving, that this was impossible and inappropriate and dangerous. Instead, she held still as he lifted his hand to cover hers. I feel her absence like a wound that won't heal, he said quietly. But when you're near, the pain dims. I don't understand it. I've tried to understand it. Alessia was my fated mate. There should be no one else. And yet... Don't. Ilara's voice shook. Don't say something you'll regret. I don't regret anything I've said to you. His thumb traced across her knuckles. You asked me once why you're here. I told you about Alessia's vision, about your courage. But there's something else. Something I've been trying to deny. Caspian ... Your scent. His eyes never left hers. From the moment you walked into that chamber, covered in blood and fear and determination, your scent hit me like a blow. It shouldn't be possible. I was bonded, mated. But I felt it, this pull toward you that defies everything I know. Ilara's breath caught. She knew what he was saying, had heard stories of it. A second chance mate. Rare, almost unheard of. Most Lycans who lost their fated mates simply faded, died of grief within months. But some, a precious few, were given another. I'm not asking anything of you, the king continued. His voice was rough with restraint. You've already given more than I deserve. But I need you to know that you're not just a midwife to me. You're not just Alaric's caretaker. You're... He struggled for words. You're the reason I'm still standing. Ilara felt tears burning in her own eyes. This ancient, powerful king, this man who had ruled for 3 centuries, who had loved and lost and somehow survived, was standing before her stripped of all pretense, vulnerable in a way she suspected he had never been with anyone except his late wife. I don't know what I am to you, she admitted. I don't know what any of this means, but I know that when I'm with you, I feel like I matter, like I'm more than just the poor midwife everyone forgot existed. She laughed shakily. No one has ever looked at me the way you do. How do I look at you? Like I'm worth something. The king's expression shattered and reformed into something fierce, something protective. You're worth everything. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that burned through her entire body. And I will spend the rest of my considerable life making sure you know it. Ilara stood in the wreckage of his chambers, her hand in his, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had come to this castle expecting to die. Instead, she was beginning to live. Delegation arrived on a grey morning, 3 weeks after the night in Caspian's chambers. Ilara watched from the nursery window as the carriages rolled through the castle gates. Fine horses, gilded doors, banners she didn't recognize in deep crimson and black. "The Northern Pack," said Helena, the elderly servant who had warmed to Ilara over the past weeks. "Lord Varen, he's been circling the king for decades, waiting for a weakness." She clicked her tongue. "Seems he's found one." "What do you mean?" Helena's eyes were knowing. A king without a queen. A throne without an heir old enough to defend it. And now rumours of a human woman living in the royal wing. She patted Ilara's arm. "Be careful, child. Men like Varen don't come bearing gifts. They come bearing knives hidden in silk." Ilara told herself it didn't matter. She was nobody. A midwife. Whatever political games the nobles played had nothing to do with her. She was wrong. The summons came that evening. Not from Caspian. From the steward, his face apologetic. "Lord Varen has requested your presence at dinner. The king could not refuse without causing offence." Ilara's stomach twisted. "I don't have anything appropriate to wear to a formal dinner." "A gown has been provided." The steward hesitated. "The king asked me to tell you that you don't have to go. He'll make your excuses." But Lord Varen was insistent. She thought of Helena's warning, knives hidden in silk. "I'll go," she said. The gown was beautiful, deep blue velvet that made her feel like she was wearing the night sky. Someone had styled her hair, painted her lips, transformed her into something she barely recognized in the mirror. Still just a midwife, she reminded herself. No matter what you're wearing. The great hall was packed with nobles, their whispers cutting off as she entered. Every eye turned to her, assessing, judging, finding her wanting. Ilara lifted her chin and walked forward. Caspian sat at the head of the long table, dressed in black, his crown a simple band of dark iron. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes tracked her every step. When she reached the empty seat beside him, not at the far end where a commoner belonged, his hand found hers beneath the table. A squeeze. Brief, reassuring. "I'm here." "So this is the famous midwife." The voice came from across the table. Lord Varen was handsome in a sharp, predatory way. Silver hair swept back from a face that might have been carved from marble. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "The human who saved our prince." "I did my duty," Ilara said quietly, humble as well as brave. Varen's gaze slid over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Tell me, how does a village midwife come to sit at the king's right hand, wearing jewels that could feed her village for a year?" The hall went silent. Even the servants stopped moving. "She sits where I place her." Caspian's voice was ice. "As is my right." "Of course, Your Majesty. I meant no offence." Varen inclined his head, but his smile sharpened. I merely wonder if perhaps your grief has clouded your judgment. The Queen's body is barely cold, and already you've installed her replacement. Ilara felt Caspian go rigid beside her. The temperature in the room dropped. I am no one's replacement, she said before she could stop herself. Every head turned to her. Queen Alessia was irreplaceable. I was there when she died. I held her son as she took her last breath. I would never presume to take her place. Varen's eyes glittered. Then what exactly is your place, midwife? That's enough. Caspian's voice cracked like thunder. He rose to his feet, and the power radiating from him made several nobles shrink back in their chairs. You come to my home, eat my food, and insult a woman under my protection. Give me one reason I shouldn't tear out your throat where you sit. Varen didn't flinch. Because you need the Northern Pack's support. Because your son is an infant and your enemies smell weakness. Because... His smile turned cruel. If you kill me over a human, every pack in the realm will know you've lost your mind to grief. The silence stretched, brittle and dangerous. Then Varen stood, adjusting his coat as if nothing had happened. Think on it, Your Majesty. I'll be staying the week. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. His gaze found Ilara one last time. The girl could be part of it. I'm sure we could find a use for her. He walked out, his entourage following. The moment the doors closed, Ilara's composure cracked. I should go. She pushed back from the table. I'm making things worse. If my presence is causing political problems. Ilara. Caspian caught her wrist. Look at me. She did. His eyes were blazing gold, barely contained fury and something else, something desperate. You are not a political problem. You are not a liability. He pulled her closer, uncaring of the nobles still watching. You are mine, and I will burn the entire northern territory to ash before I let anyone take you from me. He's right, though. Her voice broke. I'm nobody. I don't belong here. I'm just... Don't. The word was a growl. Don't you dare finish that sentence. He cupped her face in his hands, and the entire hall disappeared. There was only him. Only those golden eyes boring into hers. You want to know what your place is? I'll tell you. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Your place is beside me. Your place is in my heart. Your place is wherever you choose to stand, because I will reshape my entire kingdom around you if that's what it takes. Ilara's breath caught. Caspian, I have waited 3 weeks to do this properly, to give you time, to not be a grieving fool who mistakes gratitude for something more. His forehead dropped to hers. But I'm done waiting. I'm done pretending I don't need you like I need air. I'm done watching other men look at you and not being able to claim you as mine. Then claim me. The words left her mouth before she could think, before she could be sensible or careful, or any of the things she'd been her entire life. She was tired of being sensible, tired of being invisible, tired of standing on the outside of everything good, telling herself she didn't deserve it. This man, this ancient, terrifying, impossibly gentle king, wanted her, saw her, would burn kingdoms for her. And she wanted him too. Caspian's control shattered. He kissed her like she was oxygen, and he was drowning, like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for 300 years. His hands tangled in her hair, his body pressed against hers, and Ilara melted into him with a sob of relief. When they finally broke apart, the great hall had emptied. At some point, every noble had fled. Smart of them. Say it again, Caspian breathed against her lips. Tell me you choose this. Choose me. Ilara pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. This man who had lost everything and somehow found her. This king who saw treasure where everyone else saw trash. I choose you, she whispered. I choose us. His smile was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Then let Varen come. Let them all come. He pressed another kiss to her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. They'll learn soon enough what happens to anyone who threatens my mate. Mate. The word wrapped around her heart and squeezed. She was the Lycan king's mate, and she had never felt more alive. The bonding ceremony took place 3 days later. Ilara had expected something small, private, a quiet acknowledgement between two people who had found each other against all odds. She should have known better. The great hall was transformed. Thousands of candles burned in iron chandeliers. White flowers cascaded from every surface. Moonblooms, Helena told her, which only opened at night. The entire kingdom had been invited, from the highest nobles to the lowest servants. He wants everyone to see, Helena said as she helped Ilara into her gown. Pure white silk that flowed like water, embroidered with silver thread that caught the candlelight. Every pack, every territory, every person who ever doubted you. He wants them to watch him bind himself to you forever. Ilara's hands trembled as she looked at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back. This creature in silk and silver, with flowers woven through her hair and hope shining in her eyes. The poor midwife, she thought. Look at you now. The walk down the aisle felt like a dream. Faces blurred past her, curious, envious, awed. She saw Lord Varen in the crowd, his expression carved from stone, his plans crumbling around him. She saw Helena dabbing at her eyes. She saw servants who had once avoided her gaze now watching with something like pride. But mostly she saw Caspian. He stood at the altar in black and silver, his crown gleaming, his eyes never leaving hers. And in his arms, dressed in tiny ceremonial robes, was Alaric, awake for once, his silver eyes bright with infant curiosity. Her family, both of them. The officiant spoke words that Ilara barely heard, ancient vows in the old language, promises sealed in blood and moonlight, the way Lycans had bonded for millennia. When it came time for Caspian to speak, he handed Alaric to a waiting nurse and took both of Ilara's hands in his. I have lived for 342 years, he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. I have known war and peace, victory and defeat, love and loss. His grip tightened. I thought I knew what fate had planned for me. I was wrong. Ilara's vision blurred with tears. You walked into my life covered in blood and courage, and you saved the only thing I had left. His voice roughened. Then you saved me. You looked at a monster drowning in grief and saw a man worth loving. I will spend eternity trying to deserve that gift. Caspian, she whispered. I love you. He said it simply, without flourish, a truth as fundamental as breathing. I love you, Ilara, my mate, my queen, my heart. The tears spilled down her cheeks. I love you too. I think I have since the moment you asked me where to stand. His laugh was wet, surprised, beautiful. That was the moment you decided. You were the Lycan king. You could have killed everyone in that room. Instead, you listened to a nobody midwife. She smiled through her tears. How could I not love someone like that? The officiant cleared his throat. The vows are complete. You may seal the bond." Caspian cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. Not the desperate, claiming kiss from the great hall. This one was tender, reverent, a promise made flesh. The crowd erupted in cheers. When they finally broke apart, Caspian lifted their joined hands high. "My mate!" he announced, his voice thundering through the hall. "My queen! Bow to her as you bow to me, or face the consequences." As one, the entire assembly dropped to their knees. Lords and ladies, servants and soldiers. Even Lord Varen, his face purple with suppressed fury, forced to kneel before the village midwife he had tried to destroy. Ilara caught his eye across the bowing crowd. She didn't gloat, didn't sneer. She simply met his gaze with quiet certainty. "I belong here, and there's nothing you can do about it." Varen looked away first. Later that night, after the feast and the dancing and the endless well-wishes, Ilara stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, her chambers now, shared with her husband and their son, arms wrapped around her from behind. Caspian pressed a kiss to her temple. "You're thinking too loudly," he murmured. "I can practically hear it." "I'm thinking about how strange life is." She leaned back into his warmth. "A month ago, I was dragged from my cottage expecting to die. Now I'm queen of the realm." "Do you regret it?" "Not for a single moment." She turned in his arms, looping her hands behind his neck. "Though I do worry." "About what?" "I don't know how to be a queen. I know how to deliver babies and mix poultices. I don't know politics or protocol or—" "Ilara." He silenced her with a kiss. "You know how to see people, really see them. You know how to walk toward monsters instead of running away. You know how to speak truth to power and make ancient kings listen." Another kiss, deeper this time. "That's worth more than 1,000 lessons in protocol." She melted into him, all her worries dissolving in the heat of his touch. "Besides," he added against her lips, "you won't be alone. You'll have me. You'll have Alaric. You'll have Helena, who has already appointed herself your personal guardian." His smile turned wicked. "And you'll have an entire kingdom full of people who watched their king fall to his knees for a village midwife. Trust me, you've already won their respect." Ilara laughed, the sound bright and free in the night air. When had she last laughed like this? Had she ever? "I love you," she said. "Have I mentioned that?" "Once or twice." He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her toward their bed. "But I'd like to hear it again." "I love you, Caspian." Again. "I love you." Once more. "I love you. I love you. I love you." He silenced her with his mouth, and Ilara surrendered to the joy of being thoroughly, completely loved. 1 year later, Ilara stood in the same chamber where she had first met Caspian, the same room where Alessia had died and Alaric had been born. But this time she was not the midwife. This time, she was the one in labor. Caspian paced like a caged wolf, his control hanging by threads. Alaric, now a toddling terror with his mother's silver eyes and his father's stubborn jaw, sat in Helena's lap, watching the chaos with infant fascination. "You need to breathe," Ilara told her husband between contractions. "You're making everyone nervous." "I can't breathe. You're in pain. I can feel it through the bond, and I can't—" He dropped to his knees beside her bed, gripping her hand. "I can't lose you. I can't. You won't." She squeezed his fingers, anchoring him just as she had that first night. "I'm not going anywhere. I promise." Hours later, as dawn painted the sky in gold and pink, a princess was born, small and perfect, and screaming with healthy lungs. Caspian wept as he held his daughter for the first time. Great, shuddering sobs from a king who had conquered empires. "She's beautiful," he managed. "She's so beautiful." "She has your eyes," Ilara said, exhausted and radiant. "Golden. And your courage." He pressed a kiss to the baby's forehead, then to Ilara's lips. "Thank you. For her. For Alaric. For everything." Ilara smiled, her heart so full it ached. She had walked into this castle a poor midwife with nothing to offer but her skill and her stubborn heart. She had expected pain, expected death, expected to be forgotten the moment her usefulness ended. Instead, she had found a family, a purpose, a love so vast it still took her breath away. The poor midwife who became a queen, the nobody who became everything. And she lived, gloriously, impossibly, completely, happily ever after. If you loved Ilara and Caspian's story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Drop a comment below telling me your favorite part. I read every single one. Until next time, stay wild.